The best e-retailer. For those of you who have shopped on Zappos.com, that #1 ranking probably isn't a surprise. For those of you who haven't shopped on Zappos.com, it wouldn't take long for you to see why Zappos deserves that accolade. And it's more than the fact that Zappos has a great selection of products, super fast shipping, and free returns. The real secret to its success is its people who make the Zappos shopping experience truly unique and outstanding. The company, which began selling shoes and other products online in 1999, has put extraordinary effort into building a desirable organizational culture, which has provided a sure path to business success. As part of its culture, Zappos espouses 10 corporate values. At the top of that list is deliver wow through service. And do they ever deliver the wow? Even through the recent economic challenges, Zappos has continued to thrive. A sure sign its emphasis on organizational culture is paying off. What is the external environment and why is it important? When the Eyjafjallajökull volcano erupted in Iceland on April 14, 2010, who would have thought that it would lead to a shutdown at the BMW plant in Spartanburg, South Carolina, or the Nissan Motor Auto Assembly facility in Japan? Yet in our globalized and interconnected world, such an occurrence shouldn't be surprising at all. When volcanic ash grounded planes across Europe, supplies of tire pressure sensors from a company in Ireland couldn't be delivered on time to the BMW plant or to the Nissan plant. Because we live in a connected world, managers need to be aware of the impact of the external environment on their organization. The term external environment refers to factors, forces, situations, and events outside the organization that affect its performance. As shown in Exhibit 2.1, it includes several different components. The economic component encompasses factors such as interest rates, inflation, changes in disposable income, stock market fluctuations, and business cycle stages. The demographic component is concerned with trends in population characteristics such as age, race, gender, education level, geographic location, income, and family composition. The technological component is concerned with scientific or industrial innovations. The sociocultural component is concerned with societal and cultural factors such as values, attitudes, trends, traditions, lifestyles, beliefs, tastes, and patterns of behavior. The political legal component looks at federal, state, and local laws, as well as laws of other countries and global laws. It also includes a country's political conditions and stability, and the global component encompasses those issues like a volcano eruption associated with globalization and a world economy. Although all these components potentially constrain managers' decisions and actions, we're going to look closely at only two of the components, economic and demographic. How has the economy changed? You knew the economic context had shifted when a blue ribbon company like General Motors went bankrupt. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development predicted around 25 million unemployed individuals globally. The US unemployment rate hovered around 9%, and an economic vocabulary included terminology like toxic assets, collateralized debt obligations, TARP, bailouts, underwater homeowners, economic stabilization, wraparound mortgages, and stress tests. The recent economic crisis, often called the Great Recession by some analysts, began with turmoil in home mortgage markets in the United States, as many homeowners found themselves unable to make their payments. The problems soon affected businesses as credit markets collapsed. All of a sudden, credit was no longer readily available to fund business activities. Due to our globally connected world, it didn't take long for economic troubles in the United States to spread to other countries. What led to these massive problems? Experts cited a long list of factors including excessively low interest rates for a long period of time, fundamental flaws in the US housing market, and massive global liquidity. All these factors led businesses and consumers to become highly leveraged, which wasn't an issue when credit was easily available. However, as liquidity dried up, the worldwide economic system sputtered and nearly collapsed. With trillions lost in home value, millions of home foreclosures, a huge public debt burden in many countries, and widespread social problems due to job losses, it's clear that the US and global economic environments have changed. In the US economic system, which is based mostly on capitalistic principles. Trade and industry are controlled privately rather than by the government. But, as we've seen time and time again in such a system, people sometimes make bad, even disastrous decisions. The esteemed economist John Maynard Keynes once said, "Capitalism is the astounding belief that the most wickedest of men will do the most wickedest of things for the greatest good of everyone." Despite this cynical view, modern capitalism has created unprecedented wealth in our lifetime, shown its power to lift people out of poverty and spread a culture of competitive genius. It's also been called the most productive economic engine invented. Since the early 1900s, the US approach has been the most important model for organizing business activities. It brought the world the corporate model of ownership and organization, large-scale operations based on mass production techniques, open markets, formal organization structures with hierarchies and multiple business divisions, and labor management collective bargaining. Business organizations in many countries have patterned themselves after this model. However, as the economic problems of the past few years have shown, it's by no means perfect. Experts believe that as the US economy emerges from recession, the way businesses operate will not be the way it's always been. As the US Secretary of the Treasury said, capitalism will be different. The biggest change is likely to be in the role of government, especially in financial markets and in consumer protection. Also, government spending as a share of the US economy is likely to remain at levels not seen since World War II. Beyond that, more government intervention is likely to mean more regulations, or at the least, increased enforcement and oversight of regulations already in place. However, some believe that more governmental oversight isn't the answer. For example, social scientist Amitai Etzioni said, "The world economy consists of billions of transactions every day. There can never be enough inspectors, accountants, customs officers, and police to ensure that all or even most of these transactions are properly carried out. Moreover, those charged with enforcing regulations are themselves not immune to corruption, and hence they too must be supervised and held accountable to others who also have to be somehow regulated." The upshot is that regulation cannot be the linchpin of attempts to reform our economy. What is needed is something far more sweeping for people to internalize a different sense of how one ought to behave and act on it because they believe it is right. We've also seen a shift in public opinion as more people have expressed concerns about the growing budget deficit and increased government intervention in the economy. In a poll by the Wall Street Journal, some 49% of the respondents said they had a great deal of concern about a greater government role in the economy and business. Keep in mind that over time, this new normal will no longer be new. It will have become the norm. What's important for managers is to stay informed about new normal will no longer be new. It will have become the norm. What's important for managers is to stay informed about what's happening not only in the economic component, but in the other external environmental components as well. In fact, there is one other important external component we need to look at: demographics. What role do demographics play? Have you ever heard the phrase demography is destiny? What this phrase means is that the size and characteristics of a country's population can have a significant effect on what it's able to achieve. For instance, experts say that by 2050, emerging economies led by India and China will collectively be larger than the developed economies. Small European nations with low birth rates, such as Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Norway and Sweden, will drop off the list of the 30 biggest economies. Demographics, the characteristics of a population used for purposes of social studies, can and do have a significant impact on how managers manage. Those population characteristics include things such as age, income, sex, race, education level, ethnic makeup, employment status, geographic location, and so forth. Pretty much the types of information collected on governmental census surveys. Age is a particularly important demographic for managers since the workplace often has different age groups all working together. Baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, post-millennials. Maybe you've heard or seen these terms before. They are names given by population researchers to four well-known age groups found in the US population. Baby boomers are those individuals born between 1946 and 1964. You've heard so much about boomers because there are so many of them. The sheer numbers of people in that cohort means they've had a significant impact on every aspect of the external environment, from the educational system to entertainment/lifestyle choices to the social security system and so forth, as they've gone through various life cycle stages. Gen X is used to describe those individuals born between 1965 and 1977. This age group has been called the baby bust generation since it followed the baby boom and is one of the smaller age cohorts. Gen Y, or the millennials, is an age group typically considered to encompass those individuals born between 1978 and 1994. As the children of the baby boomers, this age group is also large in number and making its imprint on external environmental conditions as well. From technology to clothing styles to work attitudes, Gen Y is impacting organizational workplaces. Then there are the post-millennials, the youngest identified age group, basically teens and middle schoolers. This group also has been called the I generation, primarily because they've grown up with technology that customizes everything to the individual. Another name given to this age group is Generation C, since it's a group that's always been digitally connected. One thing that characterizes this group is that many of their social interactions take place on the internet, where they feel free to express their opinions and attitudes. It's the first group to have never known any reality other than that defined and enabled by the internet, mobile devices, and social networking. Population experts say it's too early to tell whether elementary school-aged children and younger are part of this demographic group, or whether the world they live in will be so different that they'll comprise a different demographic cohort. Demographic age cohorts are important to our study of management because large numbers of people at certain stages in the life cycle can constrain decisions and actions taken by businesses, governments, educational institutions, and other organizations. Studying demographics doesn't only involve current statistics, but also looks to the future. For instance, recent analysis of birth rates shows that more than 80% of babies being born worldwide are from Africa and Asia. And here's an interesting fact. India has one of the world's youngest populations, with more males under the age of 5 than the entire population of France. And by 2050, it's predicted that China will have more people aged 65 and older than the rest of the world combined. Just imagine the impact of these population trends on global organizations. How does the external environment affect managers? Knowing what the various components of the external environment are and examining certain aspects of that environment are important for managers. However, understanding how the environment affects managers is equally as important. We're going to look at 3 ways the external environment constrains and challenges managers. First, through its impact on jobs and employment. Next, through the environmental uncertainty that is present. And finally, through the various stakeholder relationships that exist between an organization and its external constituencies, jobs and employment. As any or all of the external environmental conditions change, one of the most powerful constraints managers face is the impact of such changes on jobs and employment, both in poor conditions and in good conditions. The power of this constraint became painfully obvious during the recent global recession as millions of jobs were eliminated and unemployment rates rose to levels not seen in many years. Economists now predict that about a quarter of the 8.4 million jobs eliminated in the United States during this most recent economic downturn won't come back, and will instead be replaced by other types of work in growing industries. Other countries face the same issues. Although such readjustments aren't bad in and of themselves, they do create challenges for managers who must balance work demands and having enough people with the right skills to do the organization's work. Not only do changes in external conditions affect the types of jobs that are available, they affect how those jobs are created and managed. For instance, many employers are using flexible work arrangements with work tasks done by freelancers hired to work on an as-needed basis, or by temporary workers who work full-time but are not permanent employees, or by individuals who share jobs. Keep in mind that these approaches are being used because of the constraints from the external environment. As a manager, you'll need to recognize how such work arrangements affect the way you plan, organize, lead, and control. Flexible work arrangements have become so prevalent that we'll discuss them in other chapters as well. Assessing environmental uncertainty. Another constraint posed by external environments is the amount of uncertainty found in that environment, which can affect organizational outcomes. Environmental uncertainty refers to the degree of change and complexity in an organization's environment. The matrix in Exhibit 2.2 shows these two aspects. The first dimension of uncertainty is the degree of unpredictable change. If the components in an organization's environment change frequently, it's a dynamic environment. If change is minimal, it's a stable one. A stable environment might be one in which there are no new competitors, few technological breakthroughs by current competitors, little activity by pressure groups to influence the organization, and so forth. For instance, Zippo Manufacturing, best known for its Zippo lighters, faces a relatively stable environment. There are few competitors and little technological change. The main external concern for the company is probably the declining trend in tobacco usage. In contrast, the recorded music industry faces a dynamic, highly uncertain and unpredictable environment. Digital formats, apps and music downloading sites have turned the industry upside down and brought high levels of uncertainty. The other dimension of uncertainty describes the degree of environmental complexity, which looks at the number of components in an organization's environment and the extent of the knowledge that the organization has about those components. An organization that has few competitors, customers, suppliers, or government agencies to deal with, or that needs little information about its environment, has a less complex and thus less uncertain environment. How does the concept of environmental uncertainty influence managers? Looking again at Exhibit 2.2, each of the four cells represents different combinations of degree of complexity and degree of change. Cell 1, stable, simple environment, represents the lowest level of environmental uncertainty, and Cell 4, dynamic and complex environment, the highest. Not surprisingly, managers have the greatest influence on organizational outcomes in Cell 1 and the least in Cell 4. Because uncertainty is a threat to an organization's effectiveness, managers try to minimize it. Given a choice, managers would prefer to operate in the least uncertain environments, but they rarely control that choice. In addition, the nature of the external environment today is that most industries are facing more dynamic change, making their environments more uncertain. Managing stakeholder relationships. What has made MTV a popular cable channel for young adults year after year? One reason is that it understands the importance of building relationships with its various stakeholders: viewers, reality show participants, music celebrities, advertisers, affiliate TV stations, public service groups, and others. The nature of stakeholder relationships is another way in which the environment influences managers. The more obvious and secure these relationships, the more influence managers will have over organizational outcomes. Stakeholders are any constituencies in an organization's environment that are affected by that organization's decisions and actions. These groups have a stake in or are significantly influenced by what the organization does. In turn, these groups can influence the organization. For example, think of the groups that might be affected by the decisions and actions of Starbucks, coffee bean farmers, employees, specialty coffee competitors, local communities, and so forth. Some of these stakeholders also, in turn, may impact decisions and actions of Starbucks managers. The idea that organizations have stakeholders is now widely accepted by both management academics and practicing managers. Exhibit 2.3 identifies the most common stakeholders that an organization might have to deal with. Note that these stakeholders do include internal and external groups. Why? Because both can affect what an organization does and how it operates. Why should managers even care about managing stakeholder relationships? For one thing, it can lead to desirable organizational outcomes such as improved predictability of environmental changes, more successful innovations, greater degree of trust among stakeholders, and greater organizational flexibility to reduce the impact of change. For instance, social media company Facebook is spending more on lobbying and meeting with governmental officials as lawmakers and regulators look at sweeping changes to online privacy law. The company is working to shape its image on Capitol Hill and avert measures potentially damaging to its information-sharing business. Can stakeholder management affect organizational performance? The answer is yes. Management researchers who have looked at this issue are finding that managers of high-performing companies tend to consider the interests of all major stakeholder groups as they make decisions. Another reason for managing external stakeholder relationships is that it's the right thing to do. Because an organization depends on these external groups as sources of inputs, resources, and as outlets for outputs, goods and services, managers should consider the interests of stakeholders as they make decisions. We'll address this issue in more detail in the next chapter when we look at corporate social responsibility. As we've tried to make clear throughout this section, it's not going to be business as usual for organizations or for managers. Managers will have hard decisions to make about how they do business and about their people. It's important that you understand how changes in the external environment will affect your organizational and management experiences. Now we need to switch gears and look at the internal aspects of the organization, specifically its culture. What is organizational culture and why is it important? Each of us has a unique personality, traits and characteristics that influence the way we act and interact with others. When we describe someone as warm, open, relaxed, shy, or aggressive, we're describing personality traits. An organization too has a personality which we call its culture. At Vanguard Group Inc., CEO William McNabb recently received an email from one of his sales reps that a long-time client wanted to have lunch with him. At the end of the email was a simple request: please do not suit up. The client specifically asked that the CEO not wear a suit because it made the client feel uncomfortable. Despite being more than 100 miles from the formalities of Wall Street, Vanguard had always required its employees worldwide to dress in business attire, jacket and tie for men and professional dress for women. Not anymore. McNabb announced on his blog that Vanguard was going business appropriate, meaning that employees would no longer need to suit up unless they were meeting with clients. And employees have embraced the new dress code. Expectations of appropriate work dress are one of the more visible elements of an organization's culture. What is organizational culture? Organizational culture has been described as the shared values, principles, traditions, and ways of doing things that influence the way organizational members act. In most organizations, these shared values and practices have evolved over time and determined to a large extent how things are done around here. Our definition of culture implies three things. First, culture is a perception. It's not something that can be physically touched or seen, but employees perceive it on the basis of what they experience within the organization. Second, organizational culture is descriptive. It's concerned with how members perceive or describe the culture, not with whether they like it. Finally, even though individuals may have different backgrounds or work at different organizational levels, they tend to describe the organization's culture in similar terms. That's the shared aspect of culture. How can culture be assessed? Research suggests that 7 dimensions describe an organization's culture. These dimensions range from low to high, meaning it's not typical of the culture, low, or is especially typical of the culture, high. Describing an organization using these 7 dimensions gives a composite picture of the organization's culture. In many organizations, one cultural dimension often is emphasized more than the others and essentially shapes the organization's personality and the way organizational members work. For instance, at Sony Corporation, the focus is product innovation and risk-taking. The company lives and breathes new product development, and employees' work behaviors support that goal. In contrast, Southwest Airlines has made its employees a central part of its culture, people orientation, and shows this through the way it treats them. Where does an organization's culture come from? An organization's culture usually reflects the vision or mission of the organization's founders. Because the founders had the original idea, they also had biases on how to carry out the idea. They were